Hi, and welcome to another episode of Paul's Treehouse. My name is Paul Siegel, and today I wanted to talk about a subject that's kind of complicated to really address, and I'm not really sure with what words to describe it, but essentially what I've noticed over the past 20 years, and if you look historically, probably 50 or 60, is that there's this idea of free markets, and then there's this idea of centrally planned, organized markets, kind of like the difference between um, socialism and capitalism, I guess. And the idea of a free market is that the products that emerge are going to emerge because there is some sort of demand for them. And if competitors arise making that very same product, take cars for instance, then the brands that prevail are going to be those that customers tend to buy more of. And the idea being that if the customers are free to make that choice, then ultimately what that means is that the product and the company that remains is going to be the one that produces the best product for the best price, and is able to produce them most efficiently with least cost to themselves and therefore to the environment. And so the idea is that with the free market, you have this emergence, this natural emergence of quality, all around quality, from the satisfying what customers actually want to it being a product that endures and that is priced and produced in an efficient manner. But what I've noticed lately is there seems to be the emergence of content, products, whatever, that doesn't seem to be caused by demand. It doesn't have a bottom-up flow. It has a very top-down flow. You can evidence for this never became more blatant than when President Trump was elected, because the narrative that his administration has and the philosophies and the ethics are not at all in line with what you would see in any bookstore. You go to any bookstore, the ones that have closed down now, or what is listed as a top seller on online bookstores, nothing seems to reflect, or very little anyway, the conservative ideas of limited government and more free markets and things like that. Everything that is in the market of ideas in movies, on television, it all is very, very, very left-leaning. Hello. Okay, bud. Thanks for calling.
See ya.
Love you.
Love you too.
Bye. So where was I? There's this. There seems to be this no longer a bottom-up emergence of what the market has in it. A lot of it seems top-down, especially everything that has to do with storytelling, messaging, media, news, and I think the reason why the Trump election was so jarring to American culture is, this is just my theory, is that I think over the past 50 to 60 years, there's been a top-down pressure for media and storytelling to have a particular narrative. And so, for such a public figure to emerge and fly in the face of all of that narrative, it's kind of like a disturbance in the matrix. It doesn't, his election doesn't fit the narrative, so to speak, because if truly the majority of people wanted someone like that elected, then why wouldn't the market reflect an appreciation of those values, specifically of small and limited government, deregulation, nationalism, and border control? Everything was sort of moving message-wise in the opposite direction, and this conflict between bottom-up and top-down market pressures is, I think, where the college campuses live, and the trigger culture and the hypersensitivity that is being displayed in the colleges lately. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I can link you to some videos of some college campus, some things that happened here locally near me, like the Brett Weinstein incident at Evergreen, for example, where there is just such a high amount of pent up anger and anxiety among the younger generation that it's turned educational institutions into not really educational institutions, but safe spaces for young adults to enter the workforce, I guess. Although I can't imagine how, if many of these new young adults are really, if they can't make it within the rigors of a college environment, I don't see how they could make it within the rigors of the private sector, which might explain why one of the largest growing markets is the public sector, and the U.S. government is a pretty big employer. Well, the reason I think colleges are sort of in the middle, and why there's such a firestorm going on right now in that environment, is because colleges have to respond to top-down forces and bottom-up forces at the same time. So the top-down forces are government loans. So essentially what has happened over the course of the last 50 or 60 years is governments have basically said anybody who wants to go to college can go to college, by saying everybody will qualify for a loan if they apply, essentially. And so once that law was put into effect, colleges were ecstatic, because now they didn't have to turn anybody away who couldn't afford or who couldn't qualify for financial aid. And so what that meant is that enormous numbers of students started to enroll in colleges. And since the demand was so high, more and more colleges, community colleges, private institutions just sort of just blossomed everywhere, because all of a sudden there's this huge influx of demand. Now everybody can go to college. And in the process of that hyper competitive environment and all the administrative costs that come along with dealing with all these new regulations that come into play, these colleges have found themselves in a place where their profit margins are very slim. And so they can't really afford to lose students. So the irony is that this was a huge boon to their business, but it was such a boon to the market as a whole that it created so much competition that profit margins are now really, really slim. And so they can't really afford to lose a student now. And because they can't afford to lose a single student, if a single student complains, then the institution has to change its ways in order to accommodate for this one particular student. And so what it has ended up happening is the loud minority has had control over what the majority is doing. And I think colleges are kind of like a microcosm of what's happening to many other businesses and industries in this so-called free market, because companies are having to deal with bottom-up and top-down pressures that are all coming from the same pressure. So think of the government as an enforcing agent that is going to a company and being, hey, you owe me this much money at the end of every quarter. We call this tax. And if you don't give it to me, I'll put you in jail, right? So it's this enforcer who's kind of like pointing a gun at the company and says, hey, you have to follow these laws. Otherwise, you're going to pay fees, you're going to go to jail, we're going to put you out of business, essentially. But the government is also passing laws that protect individual citizens. And these are growing in number, all sorts of protections for special groups of people. And essentially what that does is it puts guns, it makes sort of the individual citizens enforcers of these laws as well. So an educational institution has the enforcer that is the state kind of going down at them and saying, hey, follow these laws and regulations or else. But then they're also passing that power to the individual citizens who are coming into as customers to that company with their own little guns saying, hey, treat me like I want to be treated or else. And so you can imagine then, given especially that American society is a very litigious society comparatively to other nations, that it's almost an impossible economic, legal landscape for a company to thrive. In fact, it's the kind of environment that the only company that could thrive would be a mega corporation like an Amazon or a Microsoft or an Apple. And I think that it's because of these legal environmental factors that you're seeing fewer and fewer smaller companies and more larger companies surviving. Let me know what you think of that theory. It's definitely been on my mind for a long time, and I want to put it out there, see what people think. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe there's something I'm missing, but I think that is fundamentally what's causing this separation between market forces and top-down environmental forces. Environmental in this case being the government and the legal system. It seems that, ironically, humans have evolved to such a point that we're able to isolate ourselves from the pressures of nature and having to survive and dealing with environmental changes, animals that could be threats to us. We've isolated ourselves from all those unknown threats, but we've placed ourselves inside of another environment called a civilization, and that civilization has now become so complex and so threatening to a lot of people that now that environment is the pressures through which we are now evolving and becoming the species that we're becoming. Those are the pressures that are really determining what genes are going to survive into the future. And so I think it's actually a profoundly important topic to talk about, And I don't think it is being talked about. And if we don't, we're just going to let our humanity devolve, in my opinion, into something that we don't recognize. And I'd be curious to hear what you think about this theory. And let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, share it with others. Maybe use it to springboard a discussion among you and your friends. And come back here and tell me what you guys learned in the comments. I'd love to know. Thanks for watching. Bye.